Hi, Grandma here, and I'm reading The Golden Goblet, and I'm beginning on page 95 in my book, which is halfway through chapter 6. And this is Pi, who is the foreman at the stone cutters place where Ronifer is now an apprentice. Finished here, eh? Come along then. Zahotep has no more need of you. Hurry, hurry, don't lag behind. I'm a busy man. This way. There's a block of granite yonder ready for the smoothing, and I want it out of here by tomorrow. Nay, bray. And the last word was uttered in a roar so thunderous that Ronifer stopped in his track, wondering confusedly if it were some order he was supposed to understand and obey. Instantly, Pi's stick was beating a tattoo about his ankles with an irritable, "Don't lag, don't lag, don't lag." The foreman strode on again. Ronifer followed hastily. He realized now that the shot had been merely a summons to someone named Nebray, for a gangling figure was hurrying toward them from another part of the shop. Pi stopped before a side of a block of granite and pointed a bony finger at it just as the newcomer arrived. He was a boy, obviously another apprentice. He was a year or two older than Ronifer and a full head taller, with a stolid, sullen face. Pi gave them rectangular chunks of sandstone and a few barked out orders. A moment later, Ronifer found himself kneeling on the granite block face to face with Nebray, scrubbing back and forth with his sandstone as he'd seen the two men doing earlier, and producing the same rasping shrieks from the granite surface. Pi watched them a moment, mouth tight, eyes suspicious, but evidently he found nothing to criticize, for he turned suddenly and strode away. As soon as he was gone, Ronifer glanced at his companion and ventured a sideways smile. "Horrid noise this makes," he said. Nebray looked at him blankly, and briefly he said nothing. Ronifer's heart sank, but he tried once more. "Have you been here long?" Again, Nebray raised blank, indifferent eyes. "Been here?" he replied. "As an apprentice. Have you worked long at this shop?" Nebray stared a moment, then, still scrubbing its sandstone back and forth. "Aye," he said finally. His eyes were back to his work. Ronifer gave up. The longer he knelt there, scrubbing away tediously with this glum companion, the more he desired to raise his chunk of sandstone and bring it down with a crack on Nebray's head. But he thought of Hecate, and he could scarcely keep the tears from his eyes. During the next few days, Ronifer learned many things about the stonecutter's trade. He learned that sandstoning was even more monotonous than sanding the drill, and far more fatiguing. He learned that rough dressing stone with chisel and hammer, to which he was introduced his third day, was the most fatiguing of all. And while it was slightly less boring, it was much more dangerous than either of the other two tasks. He learned that when he grew tired, he made mistakes, and when he made mistakes, Pi pounced like the leopard of Upper Egypt, raining curses and blows indiscriminately upon his already aching back. He learned through fear to keep his mind every instant upon his work, not only because of Pi's wrath, but because of the painful scrapes and gouges inflicted on his hands by the slightest inattention. With the vision of Zahotep's mutilated hands floating always before his eyes like some evil prophecy, his shoulders and thin arms numb or afire from the unaccustomed labor, and his mind in a prison of monotony, he learned above all to hate the stonecutter's trade with a passion which matched intensity to his love for goldsmiths. Gebu came once each day to the shop, sometimes at mid-morning, usually at the hour of noon when all work ceased for a time, and a blessed silence descended on the shop. During this respite, some of the men ate food they had brought from their homes. Others sprawled on the gritty floor to talk or snatch a few moments' sleep. Old Zayatep and the two finishers always walked to the wine shop on the corner and drank their refreshment. Ronifer had no food to bring, no coppers to buy wine, no companions to talk to, and during his first few days he was too tired and sore to sleep or even rest. He merely sat exhausted on a block of stone and watched dully while Gebu conferred with Pi or strode about examining the progress of the work. Sometimes Gebu went to a little storeroom at the rear of the shop and took out ragged rolls of papyrus or coarse linen, selected one, and growled orders to Pi as he showed it to him. Sometimes he brought a new one to add to the store. Often he took men with him when he left and sent others back from the temple site to take their places. So there was a continual change of workmen in the shop, and Ronifer gave up trying to remember them all. Occasionally, Winneman came with Gebu, and they would pore over some linen scroll together. When this happened, Ronifer turned away and made himself as inconspicuous as possible, feeling the usual chill run up his spine at the sight of the lank, stoop-shouldered figure, muffled from head to foot in a cloak that made him look like a molting vulture. Winneman with his silent cat's feet and queerly bright eyes. However, neither Winneman nor Gebu ever took the slightest notion of him. Even at home, Gebu seemed to have all but forgotten his young half-brother's existence. He kicked Ronifer awake each morning on his way out to the courtyard and tossed him a copper to buy bread or jerked his thumb toward the storeroom to indicate there was food laid out. Each evening, he appropriated the boy's scanty wages, doled out by Pi at the close of every long day. The rest of the time, aside from a few furious cuffings to vent in ill humor or mocking taunts to enhance a good one, he ignored Ronifer completely. Ronifer was glad enough to return the favor. "At least I'm not stealing for him anymore," he often told himself as he lay on his ragged mat at night, watching the moon float high and tangle itself in the branches of the acacia tree. "Someday, please, Ammon, I will grow as big as he, and then I will free myself of him somehow and go back to goldsmithing. But then I will never, never, never look at another block of granite in my life." Meanwhile, he looked at them day after day. His muscles were slow to harden to the rough demands of the sort of labor, and as long as they were taxed beyond their strength each day, their soreness and throbbing disturbed his rest each night and filled his sleep with fitful dreams. One night it was not his own aching body, but a certain sound that roused him in the night. Quickly he raised up on his elbow. Surely he'd heard the thin squeak of the leather hinges on Gebu's bedroom door. Commonplace enough by day, in the depths of night the sound was strange and unnatural. He listened with a beating heart, thinking that Gebu was coming to punish him for some error, and expecting every second to hear his step on the stairs. He never heard the step. After a long silence, he lay back puzzled. Had he been mistaken? Or maybe instead of coming out of his room, Gebu had just gone in. But why? From where? Surely it was later than he usually came home from the riverside wine shops. Indeed, he'd come home from there once already tonight, much earlier in the evening. If the hinges had squeaked just now, he must have been returning from a second trip. And this time, instead of slamming the gate and stumping noisily across the courtyard as usual, he'd slipped as silently as his bulk would allow him up the stairs and into his room. There had even been a furtive sound about the way the hinge squeaked, as if he were cautiously easing it shut, as if he did not want even Ronifer to know he had been gone. Queer, Ronifer thought as he lay down to sleep again, shivering. Queer and awful. During these hours, kefs and mysteries possessed the world. Everyone knew that. The bars of the dread fluttered out of their temples and tombs and across the dark face of Egypt, revisiting the places they'd known in life. The malevolent slit spirits of the unburied roamed at will, seeking mischief they could do. The even more fearful beings, like the woman with her head on backwards, snatched away any children whose mothers had not bound amulets around their wrists and said the night spells over them before they slept. Surely no errand was urgent enough to draw Gebu out into all that. Then what was the noise? Something in his thoughts had stirred an elusive memory in Ronifer's mind. Finally, he captured it. The night before the day he'd brought home that last wineskin from the gold house, he'd heard the same tiny sound. Next morning, filled with his plan, he'd believed it was the fluttering wings of his father's ba that had half waked him. Had the ba come back again tonight then? He tried to believe it, but it was difficult. Perhaps he'd heard only the squeaks of hinges that other night too, and the ba had never come at all. Certainly he had not had much help from it. True, he'd waked with the plan the next morning, and the plan had worked, but look at the disaster that had followed. Still, he told himself, Father could not have known that would happen. He tried to help me. He did help me. The rest was Gebu's fault, not his. No doubt he'd come back to help me again. No doubt I shall wake in the morning with another plan. Next morning, however, all was the same. No marvel had occurred. No plan or even hope had come. A week or so later, he was awakened by the same stealthy squeak. There was no mistaking the sound of the hinges this time. Ronifer sat straight up, the goose flesh rising on his arms and little trickles running down his spine. It was the very middle of the night, he could tell by the position of the moon. Yet he could hear furtive footsteps creeping down the stairs. He heard them across the pavement, heard the faint rattle as the gate was opened, a tiny click as it closed. Incredulous, he let out his long-held breath, not once but twice, 3 times really, since he must now give up believing that the helpful in the helpful ba, Gebu had gone out into that keft-filled darkness at an hour when all men in their right mind stay in bed. Where could he be going? And why? Why? Ronifer got no answer to this question, but he did not cease to ask them whenever the nocturnal mystery was repeated, which it was at irregular intervals. He did not, of course, ask any questions of Gebu. He would sooner have thrown himself into a crocodile's jaws. After a time, the hinge squeaked less frequently, then only rarely, or else as his muscles hardened and his work grew correspondingly less exhausting, he slept more deeply and did not hear it. In either case, the matter receded to the back of his mind, still unexplained. It was merely one more thing about Gebu that he could not understand. So, if Gebu was going out at a time in the night when at the time they thought there were all sorts of unhealthy spirits roaming, it must be something that's worth a lot of money to him, and he's willing to take that risk. Well, we'll see. Bye-bye.